With the shift in the United States' stance during the Trump administration, showing less willingness to protect its allies, many countries began seeking alternatives to ensure their own security, either by strengthening their internal defenses or forming alliances less dependent on Washington. Japan is one of the most emblematic cases. Since the end of World War II, the country has relied heavily on U.S. military support. However, it now faces a serious demographic challenge. In 2024, the number of births hit a new low for the 9th consecutive year, with 720,988 babies born compared to about 1.6 million deaths. Nearly 2 deaths for every birth. Currently, 30% of the population is over 65 years old, and this share is estimated to reach 40% by 2070. Aging and population decline threaten not only Japan's economy and social structure, but also its defense capabilities. Even so, the government approved a record military budget, committing to increase defense spending to 2% of GDP by 2027. The new Prime Minister, Shigeru Ishiba, has long advocated strengthening national security so that Japan becomes a more balanced partner in the alliance with the U.S., something Washington has demanded for decades. Even before Trump's return to the presidency, former Prime Minister Fumio Kishida had already initiated ambitious plans, doubling military spending by 2027, relaxing rules for weapons development, and expanding cooperation with other allied countries. However, the recent loss of 56 seats by the Liberal Democratic Party in the 2024 elections weakened the parliamentary base, raising doubts about the viability of maintaining these investments. Even with political support, Japan faces a central obstacle: its demographics. The population is aging and shrinking so rapidly that there may not be enough people to recruit, nor sufficient fiscal resources to sustain a robust defense. Today, Japan's armed forces are much smaller than those of its neighbors, only 10% the size of China's army and 1/5 that of North Korea. If current trends continue, the country may struggle both to protect itself and to play the international role it desires. The solution would be to increase the birth rate, something simple in theory, but politically sensitive and socially difficult, as many young people find it hard to balance career and family life. This is not a problem exclusive to Japan. Several U.S. allies have even lower fertility rates, and their declining populations could also soon compromise these nations' military capabilities. The demographic crisis does not affect Japan alone. Ukraine, which already had a low birth rate before the Russian invasion in 2022, now records fewer than 1 child per woman, according to the United Nations Population Fund. In Taiwan, the fertility rate is only 0.87. For comparison, demographers consider the replacement level to be 2.1 children per woman, the number needed to keep the population stable. In South Korea, experts warn that population decline will inevitably lead to a reduction in the size of the armed forces. Japan, for its part, is particularly vulnerable to this phenomenon. Since the establishment of its self-defense forces in 1954, the country has rarely been able to meet recruitment targets. Economic stagnation, the poor reputation of military service, and cases of sexual harassment have discouraged many young people from enlisting. The situation becomes even more difficult because the world is experiencing a period of greater instability, and many prefer to avoid professions that involve direct risk. To try to attract new recruits, the Japanese Ministry of Defense has resorted to advertising campaigns featuring celebrities, pacifist messages, and even anime characters. It has also raised the maximum enlistment age from 26 to 32 years. Even so, in 2023, it did not reach even half of its new soldier recruitment goal. The population base in the 18 to 26 age group, the most important for enlistment, has shrunk by about 40% over the last 30 years, dropping from 17.43 million young people in 1994 to just over 10.2 million in 2024. To meet recruitment targets in the next decade, Japan would have to enlist more than 1% of its entire population, an almost impossible task. This shortage of personnel is already affecting the troop structure. In 2018, retired Lieutenant General Noboru Yamaguchi warned that there were too many senior officers for too few subordinates, hindering leadership development and harming internal morale. With fewer soldiers, the country will be forced to carefully choose where to deploy its forces and what responsibilities it can assume within the military alliance with the U.S. The disparity in the size of armed forces is significant. In 2022, Japan had 228,000 active military personnel, compared to 1.3 million in the United States, 500,000 active soldiers in South Korea, and another 3 million in reserves. This difference highlights the magnitude of the challenge the country faces in maintaining its security amid an increasingly tense geopolitical scenario. China has about 2 million active military personnel, while North Korea maintains approximately 1.2 million. But the impact of population aging on national defense goes beyond recruitment difficulties. It also limits the budget and slows down innovation. Japan's new defense strategy, announced in 2022, foresees investments of about $300 billion by 2027. However, pension and social welfare expenses remain the largest portion of the budget. In 2024, more than $222 billion, 33.5% of the total, were allocated to Social Security, a value 3 times higher than in 1990. These expenses tend to increase as the population ages, the workforce shrinks, and tax revenues become insufficient to sustain the system. Decades of economic stagnation have worsened the situation, and former Prime Minister Fumio Kishida's attempts to raise taxes to fund defense have failed. Population decline also hinders the goal of creating a more autonomous defense sector, reducing dependence on U.S. weapons and ammunition. The country faces a shortage of engineers, including in the semiconductor industry, fewer university graduates, and a drop in the number of doctoral degrees awarded, weakening research, development, and industrial capacity. The Ministry of Defense itself acknowledges that the demographic crisis affects national security. In the 2022 security strategy, the government admitted that population decline requires more efficient use of budget and labor. The self-defense forces have adapted operations for a smaller contingent by modifying vehicles and ships to operate with fewer crew members and by resorting to advanced technologies for tasks previously done by humans. In December 2024, the government approved funds to increase salaries and improve the work-life balance of military personnel. Even so, the so-called minimum force strategy is only a stopgap measure. Modern wars require highly trained and well-paid soldiers, and fewer people mean longer missions, less command flexibility, and a greater impact of each casualty. This also makes forming new battalions harder and overburdens active personnel, making the career less attractive. As a result, Japan will struggle to become as strong and balanced a military partner as the U.S. desires, and even more so to take on a larger role in the Indo-Pacific. Most government proposals to address demographic challenges have not advanced. One frequently suggested alternative is increasing immigration, but Japan has historically received few foreigners. While this might help raise birth rates and revitalize the economy in the long term, it will not immediately solve the military recruitment problem, since only Japanese citizens can serve in the armed forces. In practice, the United States can pressure Japan as much as it wants to invest more in defense, but it is unlikely that the country will fully meet both nations' expectations. Tokyo and Washington will have to adjust their goals, especially in the long term, when the effects of population aging will be even more severe. This situation raises a strategic question. How will Japan guarantee its own security? Some analysts argue that possessing extremely powerful weapons, such as nuclear bombs, could be the only way to ensure deterrence. However, this would inevitably increase tensions in the region and globally.